If you're watching this on the Digital Digs website, then you can see that I've been busy this weekend with a little bit of redesign. And part of my redesign is a plan to start to do a little video blogging, to try and do it every week. I wish I could say that I was going to come up with some really interesting video. We'll see. But I'm at least trying to dedicate myself to doing some of this talking head stuff and see if it makes any kind of difference, see how people respond to it. Today I want to talk a little bit about this Richard Florida book that I've been reading here. It's Flight of the Creative Class. It's an interesting read. It's something I might have my students read. It's thought-provoking. I don't know that I necessarily agree with Florida or not. I really can't claim to be enough of an expert in his field to know about the validity of his arguments. I admit that there's a certain part of me that finds his argument appealing. I'm attracted to the idea of living in a place where there's plenty of tolerance for different people and different ideas, and there's lots of things going on, and it would be nice to think that there was an emerging class of creative people around the world and in this country that feel similarly and like to do those kinds of things and are interested in that kind of stuff. I don't know if that's the case or not, but it's an interesting thing to talk about with students, particularly students at Cortland who come as professional writing majors and want to do creative things, like to be creative, think of themselves as creative writers primarily. That's where a lot of our students are coming from, and yet at the same time, they come generally from parts of New York State that are pretty homogenous. Upstate New York is pretty homogenous. Some of them do come from Long Island, which is obviously more diverse than what's upstate. But for the most part, Cortland itself obviously is a very homogenous place, not only in terms of the county, but in terms of the college. And a lot of our students feel nervous or reticent about the idea of interning in a big city, and certainly, they're not thinking about moving to one of these big cities that Florida talks about, these global talent magnets, as he calls them. They're nervous about the idea of moving to those kinds of places. So they're in an interesting kind of predicament where, on the one hand, they think of themselves as creative and they want to enter into creative professions, but they're not really comfortable with the idea of really doing what it takes to pursue a career in those fields. And so reading a book like Florida's, I think, would give them a way to start thinking about what it might mean to actually be a creative professional, to be a writer or an editor, a professional writer of some kind, or work in new media or in some other creative profession, where they would have to go, what their lives would be like, all those kinds of things. And so at least on that level, I think the book is interesting. Also, though, from a more general perspective, one of the things that Friedman in Florida and all these other folks making similar kind of arguments seem to have in common is a repeated emphasis on the importance of education, which of course is nice to hear as a professor, that the future of the economy depends upon a well-educated workforce, and that there's this continual stress about trying to incorporate more money, to put more money into education and into research and so on. And yet, at the same time, it seems like a very familiar story, right? That in Florida talks particularly at one point about literacy skills. A 1% increase in literacy relates to an increase in GDP and all these other economic indicators. And we've heard this story before, right? That literacy is a gateway to upward mobility, and yet we know that's not the story, the entire story. In addition, not people like Florida and Friedman and so on, they do not really attempt to answer the question of what literacy is, and nor should they necessarily. And so that's obviously becomes a big question as they are starting to point towards all the things that we talk about here in our courses. The changing technology, the increasing of globalization, and communicating in networks, all those kinds of things. It would seem that literacy is shifting, and what that means for education is obviously something that we don't have a complete picture about, and yet people like Florida are happy to just kind of say, let's just put some money into education and support education. Obviously, it's more complex than that for him, but I just find it kind of interesting that we would think about education as the solution to our problems once again. And so I'm hoping that along with these great ideas that these folks want to propagate, that if they want to look to education as a solution, that they might have some ideas about how that might actually work.